In the heart of America, in the small, serene town of Brooklyn, Iowa, the summer of 2018 unfolded with its usual quiet charm. This peace was shattered on the evening of July 18, when a young woman named Molly Tibbetts went for her regular jog and never returned. Molly, a 20-year-old psychology student, was known for her radiant smile and kind heart. She was a beacon of light in her community and at the University of Iowa, where she was pursuing her dreams. The day had been like any other in Molly's life. She had spent her time working at a day camp, bringing joy and laughter to children's lives. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Molly laced up her running shoes. She waved goodbye to the empty house. Her boyfriend, Dalton, was away on work, leaving her alone for the evening. Before stepping out, she sent Dalton a playful photo on Snapchat, capturing a moment of her life, unaware it would be her last. Molly's route through the familiar streets was one she had taken many times before. The neighbors knew her by sight, often waving or exchanging pleasantries as she passed. But as night fell, a chilling silence took hold. Molly didn't return home. The hours ticked by, and with each passing moment, the unease grew. The following morning, when Molly didn't show up for work, alarm bells rang. It was unlike her to miss work without notice. Her family, knowing her responsible nature, felt a deep sense of dread. Calls to her phone went unanswered, vanishing into the void. As the news of her disappearance spread, the town of Brooklyn, usually a picture of idyllic American life, transformed. A community where doors were seldom locked now felt the creeping tendrils of fear. The local police, along with state investigators and the FBI, launched an extensive search. The nation's eyes turned to this small Iowa town, watching as a search for one of its own unfolded. The mystery of Molly Tibbetts' disappearance had just begun, setting in motion a search that would captivate the country and reveal the darker undercurrents hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. Molly Tibbetts' story begins far from the quiet streets of Brooklyn, Iowa. Born on May 8, 1998, in the bustling city of San Francisco, California, Molly's life was one of movement and change. Her early childhood was marked by the scenic views of the Golden Gate Bridge and the vibrant streets of San Francisco. However, this urban backdrop of her early years was soon to change. When Molly was in the second grade, her parents' marriage came to an end. The divorce, a turning point in her young life, led her, her mother, and her two brothers to relocate to a different world, Iowa. Despite the distance, Molly's father maintained a close relationship with his children, bridging the miles with love and dedication. Iowa presented a new chapter for Molly. She adapted to this change with resilience, embracing the close-knit community spirit of her new home. The rolling fields and open skies of Iowa were a stark contrast to the cityscapes of her birthplace, but Molly found beauty and peace in this new setting. As she grew up, Molly blossomed into a young woman of many talents and passions. She excelled in school, showing a particular interest in psychology, which led her to enroll at the University of Iowa. Outside the classroom, she devoted her time to helping others, particularly children. She found joy and purpose in her job at a day camp, where she was not just a counselor but a role model, friend, and source of inspiration to the kids she worked with. Molly's life in Iowa was full of activity and social connections. She had a wide circle of friends, and her social media accounts were a testament to her zest for life. Her Instagram, filled with cheerful and life-affirming posts, reflected her outlook. Every day was a great day to be alive. The summer of 2018 found Molly in Brooklyn, Iowa, a small town that epitomized rural America. With a population of just 1,400 people and an area slightly over 3 square kilometers, Brooklyn was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. It was a community woven together with the threads of familiarity and trust, a place where the unexpected was just not expected. In this backdrop of serene predictability, Molly's disappearance struck a discordant note. It was a jarring interruption to the rhythm of life she had so lovingly crafted. Her family, friends, and the larger community of Brooklyn were left grappling with a void that her absence created, a void that echoed with unanswered questions and unspoken fears. As the sun set on the day Molly vanished, the light in the lives of those who knew her seemed to dim a little. The search for her was not just a search for a missing person. It was a quest to restore the balance in a world that had been unexpectedly upturned. July 18, 2018, began as an ordinary summer day in Brooklyn, Iowa. The small town, nestled in the heartland of America, was a portrait of tranquility. But as the day unfolded, it was destined to be etched in the memory of its residents forever. Molly Tibbetts, a familiar face in the community, had spent her day as she usually did, filled with the activities that defined her life. Her job at the day camp had been particularly rewarding that day, leaving her with a sense of fulfillment as she returned home. The house, usually bustling with the presence of her boyfriend, Dalton Jack, was unusually quiet. Dalton had left town for a work assignment, leaving Molly alone for the evening. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the fields of Iowa, Molly decided to go for her routine evening jog. It was an activity that not only kept her fit, but also gave her time to reflect and enjoy the beauty of her small town. Before stepping out, she snapped a photo of herself and sent it to Dalton via Snapchat, a simple act of sharing a moment in her life. Her jogging route was a familiar one, taking her through the streets of Brooklyn, where she was a well-known and beloved figure. Neighbors would often see her pass by, her strides confident and rhythmic. But as dusk turned to night, something went terribly wrong. Molly, who was always punctual and reliable, did not return home. The next day dawned with an unsettling silence. Molly was due to work at the day camp, but she never arrived. This was completely out of character for her, known for her responsibility and commitment. Concern quickly turned to alarm among her family and friends. Calls to her phone went unanswered, ringing hollow in the empty house. The news of her disappearance spread rapidly through the town. For a community where such incidents were unheard of, this was a startling and frightening development. Neighbors who had greeted her just the day before now found themselves in the grip of a growing unease. The small town, once a haven of safety and familiarity, was now clouded with uncertainty and fear. The local police, unaccustomed to dealing with such cases, were immediately alerted. The seriousness of the situation was apparent, and the search for Molly Tibbetts began in earnest. It was not just a search for a missing person. It was a race against time, a desperate effort to bring her home. As hours turned into days with no sign of Molly, the town of Brooklyn and the entire nation watched, waited, and hoped. The quiet streets where Molly had run were now pathways of a mystery, echoing with questions that had no answers. The case of Molly Tibbetts' disappearance was unfolding into a story that would captivate and shock the nation. In the wake of Molly Tibbetts' disappearance, the small town of Brooklyn, Iowa, found itself thrust into a spotlight it had never sought. The once tranquil community became the center of a search that would quickly escalate into a statewide, and eventually, a national concern. Molly, a beloved daughter, friend, and student, had vanished, and with her disappearance, a wave of unease washed over the town. The initial hours following Molly's failure to return from her jog were marked by confusion and disbelief. Her family and friends, who knew her as a responsible and punctual young woman, were immediately concerned. It was unlike Molly to miss work without any notice or to be out of contact. Her absence was a stark contrast to her usual communicative and reliable nature. As the news spread, neighbors, local residents, and community members rallied together, a testament to the close-knit fabric of Brooklyn. The town, with a population barely crossing 1,000, was a place where such incidents were unheard of, a place where safety was a given. The revelation that one of their own could disappear so abruptly was not just alarming. It was incomprehensible. The local police, alongside Molly's family, began organizing search parties. The vast cornfields, the quiet streets, and the surrounding areas were combed meticulously. Flyers with Molly's picture were distributed, and her description was broadcast across news channels and social media platforms. The community's efforts were fueled by hope and a relentless desire to find Molly. As days passed with no sign of her, the reality of the situation began to sink in. The search for Molly Tibbetts was no longer a local effort. It had captured the attention of the nation. The FBI and state investigators joined the search, bringing in resources and expertise to aid the investigation. The case was not just a search for a missing person. It had become a symbol of every family's worst nightmare. The people of Brooklyn, who had once lived their lives with their doors unlocked and a sense of security, now faced a new reality. A sense of vulnerability permeated the town as residents grappled with the fact that such a tragedy could strike so close to home. The disappearance of Molly Tibbetts had shattered the town's idyllic image, exposing the fragility of their sense of safety. Amidst the growing media attention and the expanding search efforts, Molly's family held on to hope. They appealed to the public for any information, no matter how small, that could lead to Molly's whereabouts. The town, united in their concern and fear, awaited any news that could bring resolution to the growing mystery. The disappearance of Molly Tibbetts had transformed the town of Brooklyn. What was once a community marked by its tranquility was now a place haunted by the unknown. The search for Molly continued, with each passing day adding to the urgency and desperation of a town clinging to hope. As the search for Molly Tibbetts extended beyond the initial days, the scope of the investigation widened dramatically. Law enforcement agencies, including local police, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, and the FBI, collaborated in a sweeping effort to find her. The small town of Brooklyn, Iowa, had become the epicenter of a search operation that was drawing national attention. The investigation team worked tirelessly, sifting through thousands of leads. Every possible angle was explored, from interviewing locals to scrutinizing surveillance footage. The community, still reeling from the shock of Molly's disappearance, lent their full support, assisting in searches and providing any information they could. Despite the exhaustive efforts, the investigation hit roadblocks. The leads, while numerous, often led to dead ends. Investigators found themselves wading through a sea of information, much of it leading nowhere. The absence of concrete clues added to the growing frustration and despair. As the days turned into weeks, the search for Molly spread beyond Brooklyn. Fields, farms, and surrounding areas were combed through, with search parties often working round the clock. Volunteers from across the state joined the efforts, united by the common goal of finding Molly and bringing her home. The community's involvement was a poignant reminder of the impact Molly had on those around her. People who had never met her joined the search, touched by her story and compelled to help. The town of Brooklyn, once a quiet and unassuming place, had become a symbol of communal resilience and solidarity in the face of adversity. The investigators, in their relentless pursuit of answers, followed up on every lead, no matter how small. They conducted interviews, checked alibis, and pieced together Molly's last known movements. The scrutiny extended to everyone in Molly's life, as law enforcement left no stone unturned. The case of Molly Tibbetts, which had started as a local search for a missing person, had evolved into a massive operation. It was a testament to the determination of a community and a nation to find answers. However, the mystery surrounding her disappearance continued to deepen, challenging the resolve of those searching for her. As the investigation progressed, the lack of clear evidence began to weigh heavily on everyone involved. The question of what happened to Molly Tibbetts remained unanswered, shrouded in uncertainty. The search efforts, marked by a mix of hope and despair, continued unabated, driven by the collective will to uncover the truth. The investigation into Molly Tibbetts' disappearance entered a phase fraught with false leads and growing desperation. Each new lead that emerged brought a glimmer of hope, only to be extinguished as it led nowhere. The case, which had captured the nation's attention, seemed to be mired in uncertainty. One such lead took the investigation hundreds of miles away to Kearney, Missouri. A reported sighting of Molly at a truck stop sparked a flurry of activity. The lead seemed promising. It was a tangible thread in a case that had offered few. Law enforcement officials raced to follow up, but their efforts were in vain. The sighting in Missouri was a dead end, a mirage in the vast desert of leads. Meanwhile, in Brooklyn, Iowa, the focus of the investigation also turned towards those closest to Molly. In cases like these, it was standard procedure to consider those in the victim's immediate circle. Dalton Jack, Molly's boyfriend, came under scrutiny. The investigation delved into his whereabouts and activities on the night of Molly's disappearance. But as the inquiry deepened, it became clear that Dalton's alibi was solid. He had been miles away for work, eliminating him as a suspect. As weeks turned into a month, the lack of progress in the case was palpable. The initial surge of leads had given way to a frustrating stagnation. The hundreds of tips and interviews had not yielded the breakthrough for which everyone had hoped. The community's initial shock and fear began to mix with a sense of helplessness. Despite the setbacks, law enforcement remained committed. The FBI, along with state and local investigators, continued their painstaking work. They combed through Molly's digital footprint, analyzed her social media accounts, and retraced her steps on the day she vanished. Yet, the absence of conclusive evidence was a constant challenge, a reminder of the complexities of the case. The investigation into Molly's disappearance was a labyrinth of possibilities, each path explored with the hope of finding the crucial piece of evidence that would lead to her. But as the days passed, that hope was tested. The lack of answers only added to the anguish of Molly's family and the anxiety of a community on edge. In Brooklyn, the impact of Molly's disappearance was profound. The town, once a place where neighbors greeted each other with smiles, now bore the weight of an unsolved mystery. Doors that were once left unlocked were now secured, and the sense of security that had been a hallmark of life in Brooklyn was replaced by caution and fear. The case of Molly Tibbetts had become more than a search for a missing person. It was a symbol of the fragility of safety and the unpredictability of fate. As the investigation continued, the community held on to hope, even as the trail seemed to grow colder with each passing day. The search for Molly Tibbetts, which had stretched on for weeks, took a tragic turn on August 21, 2018. The painstaking investigation, the tireless searches, and a collective hope of a community were shattered by a grim discovery in a cornfield in Poweshiek County, Iowa. The body found was soon identified as Molly Tibbetts. The confirmation of her identity brought an outpouring of grief, not just in Brooklyn, Iowa, but across the nation. The young woman, who had become a symbol of innocence and hope, had met a tragic end. The news reverberated through the community, leaving a profound sense of loss and disbelief. The discovery of Molly's body brought a somber resolution to the question of her whereabouts, but it also opened a new chapter in the investigation, one focused on finding justice for her. The serene landscape of the cornfield, a typical symbol of Iowa's rural beauty, had become a crime scene, holding the clues to a senseless act of violence. The autopsy revealed the harsh realities of Molly's final moments. She had been the victim of a brutal attack, a fact that only intensified the sorrow and anger felt by her loved ones and the public. The nature of her death was a stark contrast to the vibrant and joyous life she had led, a life cut tragically short. In the wake of this discovery, the town of Brooklyn grappled with a new reality. The place they knew, a community where everyone felt safe and protected, had been irrevocably changed. The tragedy of Molly's death was a reminder of the fragility of life and the presence of evil even in the most idyllic of settings. The investigation, now a homicide case, intensified. Law enforcement agencies were determined to bring the perpetrator to justice. Every available resource was poured into the case, with investigators combing through evidence and revisiting leads. Molly's family, faced with the unimaginable loss of their daughter, became advocates for justice. Their grief was shared by the entire nation, which had followed Molly's story with hope and now mourned her death. The case had touched the hearts of people far beyond the borders of Brooklyn, Iowa. The discovery of Molly's body marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. It was a call to action, a driving force behind the relentless pursuit of the truth. The community, united in their grief, stood behind the Tibbetts family and law enforcement, awaiting the answers that would explain why Molly's life was so tragically taken. The somber discovery of Molly Tibbetts' body was a turning point in the investigation. It was not long after this tragic finding that a significant breakthrough occurred. The intensive search for answers led to the arrest of Christian Bahena Rivera, a 24-year-old man, bringing a shocking development to the forefront of the case. Rivera, an undocumented immigrant from Mexico, had been living in the United States for several years. His arrest immediately sparked a whirlwind of media attention and public discourse, especially given the political climate around immigration at the time. The narrative of the case took a turn, intertwining with broader national debates. The breakthrough in the investigation came from surveillance footage obtained from the vicinity of Molly's jogging route. The video revealed a Chevy Malibu circling the area at the time of Molly's disappearance. This critical piece of evidence led investigators to Rivera. Upon being questioned, Rivera confessed to the abduction and murder of Molly Tibbetts, a confession that sent shockwaves through the community and the nation. According to his account, he had seen Molly jogging, was drawn to her, and decided to follow her. His initial attempts at interaction escalated to a confrontation, which tragically led to him assaulting and then killing her. Rivera's confession brought a flood of emotions: relief that a suspect had been apprehended, but also horror at the circumstances of Molly's death. The community of Brooklyn, already reeling from the loss, now had to grapple with the brutal reality of the crime. The arrest of Rivera also cast a spotlight on the issue of undocumented immigration, a topic that was already a heated subject in American politics. The fact that Rivera had been living in the country illegally added a complex layer to the public's reaction to the case. Discussions and debates erupted nationally, using Molly's tragic story as a focal point for broader arguments on immigration policy. For the Tibbetts family, Rivera's arrest was a small solace in their immense grief. While it provided some answers, it also raised painful questions about the randomness and cruelty of the act that took Molly from them. The community, too, felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that justice might be served, but sorrow that it could not bring Molly back. Rivera's arrest marked a critical juncture in the story of Molly Tibbetts, a story that had started with a mysterious disappearance and had now evolved into a narrative about the tragic loss of a young woman and the complex societal issues her death had inadvertently highlighted. The arrest of Christian Bahena Rivera for the murder of Molly Tibbetts marked the beginning of a new complex chapter in the saga. As the legal proceedings commenced, the case continued to hold the nation's attention, encapsulating not just a quest for justice, but also igniting debates on broader social and political issues. The trial of Rivera was a protracted affair, fraught with twists and turns. Initially, Rivera had confessed to the crime, providing detailed accounts of his actions on the day of Molly's disappearance. However, as the trial progressed, his defense took a different turn. Rivera, now asserting his innocence, claimed amnesia about the events of that fateful evening. This sudden shift in his defense strategy added a layer of complexity and unpredictability to the trial. The Tibbetts family, still immersed in their grief, was now also caught in the midst of a high-profile legal battle. They sought justice for Molly, a desire shared by the entire community of Brooklyn and by many across the country who had been touched by her story. Each day of the trial brought them face to face with the harrowing details of their daughter's final moments. The trial became a focal point for discussions on immigration policy in the United States, given Rivera's status as an undocumented immigrant. The case was cited in national debates, often polarizing opinions and overshadowing the personal tragedy at its core. Molly's family found themselves at the center of this discourse, with her father explicitly stating his desire to keep Molly's memory separate from political agendas. As the trial unfolded, the defense and prosecution presented their cases, each arguing their perspectives on Rivera's involvement in Molly's death. The prosecution pointed to the evidence and Rivera's initial confession, while the defense highlighted the lack of direct forensic evidence linking him to the crime and his later claims of memory loss. After intense deliberations, the jury delivered its verdict. Rivera was found guilty of first-degree murder, a decision that brought a tumultuous mix of relief and sorrow. For many, the verdict was seen as a step towards justice for Molly, yet it also served as a grim reminder of the irrevocable loss her family and community had suffered. The sentencing of Rivera to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole was a conclusion to the legal aspect of the case, but it was far from a closure for those who knew and loved Molly. The trial and its outcome were just one part of a larger, more complex narrative that had begun with Molly's disappearance and had evolved to encompass themes of justice, memory, and the societal implications of a single tragic event. In the aftermath of Christian Mahina Rivera's trial and conviction, the small town of Brooklyn, Iowa, and indeed the entire nation, began a period of reflection. The story of Molly Tibbetts, which had started as a local missing persons case, had evolved into a narrative with national significance, touching on themes of safety, justice, and the complexities of the human experience. Molly's tragic fate left an indelible mark on the community of Brooklyn. The town, once a bastion of safety and neighborliness, had to come to terms with the harsh reality that such a tragedy could occur in their midst. The sense of invulnerability that small-town America often feels was pierced by the events surrounding Molly's death. For the Tibbetts family, the end of the trial did not signify an end to their grief, but it provided a measure of justice. They continued to remember Molly not for the way she died, but for the vibrant life she lived. Her passion for life, her kindness, and her aspirations in psychology remained the truest testament to her spirit. Molly's story, in its retelling and coverage, had become a focal point for a national conversation on immigration. The fact that her killer was an undocumented immigrant had been seized upon by some to advance political agendas, often overshadowing the personal tragedy at the core of the case. Molly's father notably advocated against using his daughter's death for political purposes, emphasizing the need to remember her as a person, not a symbol. The legacy of Molly Tibbetts extended beyond the boundaries of Brooklyn. She became a symbol of innocence lost and the random cruelty of fate. Her story prompted communities everywhere to reflect on their safety, to hold their loved ones a little closer, and to be more vigilant about their surroundings. Schools and communities initiated programs and discussions about personal safety, emphasizing the importance of being aware and prepared. The impact of Molly's story was far-reaching, influencing attitudes towards community safety and individual responsibility. The conclusion of the trial did not bring Molly back, but it offered a resolution to a story that had captivated the nation. The grief and the lessons it imparted, however, would linger on. Molly's memory continued to inspire acts of kindness and a renewed appreciation for life's fragility. In Brooklyn, Iowa, and across the country, Molly Tibbetts would be remembered not just for the tragic circumstances of her death, but for the light she brought into the world during her short life. Her legacy, a complex tapestry woven from threads of sorrow, hope, and resilience, would continue to resonate, a poignant reminder of the depth of human experience and the enduring spirit of community in the face of adversity.